Welcome to the Regenerative Brands podcast. This is a place for consumers, operators, and investors to learn about the consumer brands supporting regenerative agriculture and how they're changing the world. This is your host, Kyle, joined by my co-host, AC, who's going to take us into the episode.
On this episode, we have Rafaela Gontijo Lenz, who is the founder and CEO at NUU. NUU is supporting regenerative agriculture with its lineup of regenerative cassava-based foods that includes cheese bread pizza, tapioca sticks, and more. These items are sold at over 1,500 retail and food service points of sale in Brazil. In this episode, we learn how Rafaela was inspired to leave her job at Johnson & Johnson to start a cheese bread company supporting smallholder farmers, her regenerative awakening and NUU's regenerative journey, and their recent $4 million fundraise that is set to power their future vision. NUU is a certified B Corp, certified carbon neutral, led by an entirely female C-suite, and has been recognized by the United Nations as one of 50 global companies to help lead the regenerative food movement. This was an amazing episode with Rafaela, y'all, and we were honored to have her join us as our second guest in our international series. Let's go. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Regen Brands podcast. Super excited today to have episode 2 of our international series with Rafaela from NUU. So welcome, Rafaela.
Thank you. Thank you guys for the invitation.
Absolutely. We're super excited to have you to learn about the Brazilian food systems and how they are similar and or different from the United States. So super pumped about that. I'm on the website right now. The packaging looks phenomenal, really fun, approachable brand. So we're really excited to learn more about this. Before we dive too deep into the origin story, give our listeners a quick lay of the land. What SKUs do you produce? Where could people find your products today?
So we are 100% yucca-based products. They are in the frozen category. You can find them on national and regional retail and food service. On retail, we have 12 SKUs, and on food service, we have 16 SKUs. In the middle of Brazil to the south, mostly. Big cities.
Okay. And did you say yucca-based?
Yeah, 100% of the products are yucca-based, yeah. Manioc.
That's the same thing as cassava is usually the more typical term here in America.
Okay.
Yep.
Cassava.
Yep.
No, We'll say yucca for the rest of the episode. We want to be context specific.
Exactly.
But I just want to make sure
Thank
that
you.
I understand what we're talking about and our listeners understand what we're talking about. So cassava-based, yucca-based, those are interchangeable terms.
Exactly.
Yeah. And we can dive a lot more into that. I think that's a really interesting piece. I know I've had a lot of yucca or cassava-based products, in my paleo diet journey when I was explicitly really not eating grains. And it's either native to Brazil or native to that area, right, Rafaela?
Yeah, it's originally from Amazon rainforest and it's all over Brazil. It was the base of indigenous cuisine when Brazil was colonized by Portugal. So It's very inherent in our gastronomic culture in Brazil, and you can find it everywhere. But it's the first time that a company really takes it as a hero ingredient to produce all the products. So we're excited with that.
Yeah, super cool. Well, we're talking history already, so take us back to where this all started and kind of how you created the brand and what's the origin story.
Okay, so before I talk about the brand, I think it's good to disclaim how cheese bread was created, because cheese bread is the number one baked good consumed in Brazil. Anthony, I think you've tried already, right? Pão de queijo? No?
No. But I remember
Kyle?
in the one time we talked, you said this is like a croissant in France, right? Mm-hmm. It's like the equivalent in terms of
a bagel in US or muffin US. It's all over.
Yeah, so I've had Brazzy Bites, which I believe are similar, probably not necessarily as high quality and or regenerative, but that to me is like the comparative product for our market. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Exactly, it's the same thing. It's cheese. Well, we call it pão de queijo in Brazil, and it's extremely popular. It's a 2 billion reais market. You can find it everywhere, from schools to restaurants to coffee shops. It's really popular. And so I was working actually at Johnson & Johnson when I started NUU. I was a trainee there, normal multinational path. of career, and I used to bring cheese bread from the farmers that my parents live to my friends in Rio. I live in Rio de Janeiro,
Wow.
and everyone was super impressed with the taste. And to me, it was very normal because it was the cheese bread that I used to eat when I was a kid, and I always brought this cheese breads to Rio, so I wasn't eating a lot of cheese bread from supermarkets, and I wondered why people thought it was so different. And I went to the supermarkets and saw that what happened to cheese bread is that over the decades, companies started ultra industrializing the products and really changing the key ingredients to make it cheaper. And I decided to quit Johnson and Johnson and start. I started in the kitchen of my house actually with a mixer borrowed by my mother-in-law. Like stayed 2 years in the farmers market, but really staying true to the original recipe of cheese bread. Cheese bread was created in the 18th century in the farms of Minas Gerais, which is the state that I was born and raised. And it's so interesting because we don't know who created it, but given the history of time, mostly probably was a slave woman, because there were a lot of slave women in the kitchen in the golden cycle, in the coffee cycle in Minas Gerais. So she used to bake breads with wheat coming from Portugal, and those wheats were coming with a poor quality. So in one day, she decided to change this wheat to yuca powder that was the base of indigenous cuisine. So there is a hand of a slave woman, a heritage of indigenous cuisine with yuca, and a heritage of milk, raw milk cheese that was from Portugal. So she mixed it all in a pot or something and created the little balls that we eat today. So the beginning was that. It was just to go back to Minas Gerais. I think that we tasted nearly 200 different recipes to know what's the secret sauce. And, there's no secret sauce. It's just good.
Hold on. How tired of cheese bread were you at this point in time? Were you just like, I can't taste another one of these? Or was it like, bring it on, like, I need to try every single one?
I need to try it's my favorite food. I love it. It's so good. And I don't know, it was never enough.
Yeah. And do most people in the country, Rafaela, still like produce it at home if they're more like in a rural area, and then it's mainly the urbanites that are eating the processed products that are at like the grocery stores, or what's the current state of the eating of the product?
Yeah, it's a good question. If you go to Minas Gerais, everyone has a better, and we always say that we don't make the best cheese bread of the world, but the best cheese bread for the world, because the cheese bread of the world is still made by, my grandmother, the grandmother of my friends, like all these people that are in the kitchen. But in Minas Gerais, people still make it because it's where the recipe was born. It's very related to the state culture, but in the other states, people buy it frozen in the supermarket. So huge opportunity to deliver high quality, good for you and the body product to the other states.
I really love that statement, not necessarily the best in the world, but the best for the world, because it provides a level of like honor for those who are in the kitchens doing it every day. But it also very clearly states the intention of what your brand is trying to accomplish. And there's always this give and take between scale and purpose, right? So that shows us like what you're leading with that purpose, which is fantastic. And I'm sure it's probably still the best cheese bread at scale, no doubt. So that's still a win. I'm curious. So like, walk us through some of the journey. Like you're eating 200 different recipes of cheese bread. You're starting to commercialize this product. We don't know much about the Brazilian market. Like, how do you start once you have like a brand in a package? Like, what does that initial like go to retail look like, or is it go to food service, or what did that whole journey look like?
Yeah, so we started in 2015. Back then, you could find only 2 or 3 cool, better for you brands in the supermarkets. It was very massive with legacy brands.
Not of cheese bread, of everything is what you're saying.
Of everything. No, of everything. Today you have all the categories like, coffee, chocolate, breads. You can see like these small brands like NUU is doing But this is very new. It's something from 5 years to now. So when we started, it was only us and 2 other brands. We started in the farmers market, selling to friends and, a few small cafeterias, coffee shops. And then the biggest retail in Rio called us to start selling to them. And then the thing got a little bit serious, because now we're talking of 60 points of sales in the biggest retail in Rio. We had to move from the kitchen of my house, obviously, to a co-packer. And, co-packers and this structure of scale is not something, it's more new now, but white label, private label, co-packers, distributors, it wasn't something very popular in Brazil. You couldn't find those. So I had to literally go to the industries, knock on the doors and say, hey, do you want to produce my cheese bread? And fortunately, and it was something like they were doing, how do you call that, charity. They were maybe doing some charity, because the volume was very low in the beginning, and it was a bet that we would grow with them, and that's what happened. And we found industry factory near our farm in Minas Gerais, which was great, because back then my dad was producing the cheese bread, the cheese, the raw milk cheese that we were using. So we could find a manufacturing there that used my dad's my dad's cheese, and then we started growing. And then we were doubling digit. We were going to different states only with cheese bread. And then COVID hit in 2020. When COVID hit, I was with my twins. I have twins, two girls. They are 6 months old. And I was in Rio and had to go back to my parents' farm to, move away from all this craziness and and provide a, early moment in life in nature for them. Yeah. And that's when we rethought all of the business and tried to create a nature positive company that could lead to a better world for the kids. So like before COVID, before the twins, was like, okay, raw milk cheese, smallholder farmers, local suppliers, but only with cheese bread, and everything changed after 2020.
What was the aha moment? Just the, going back to that more rural landscape and seeing that these people needed support, or just falling in love with what you were seeing there, or, the children, or this confluence of all those things? Like what was the aha moment? And was regenerative like the term attached to it at the time, or has regenerative become like what you've called it, or like what's the regenerative piece?
Such a good question, because imagine me with my twin girls in the farm. My dad has a cow, so we would eat the cheese from the how to call that, like where people, how to call that in English, where you make the cheese, a barn, how to call it?
Yeah, like artisan cheese making. I don't know what you would call the specific
the place where you go and you take the cheese, So
we'll make it. We'll call it a cheesery. Is it a creamery? It's a cheesery. I have no idea.
Yeah, cheesery.
Yeah, cheesery is fine for today's purposes.
Yes. So we would go there in the morning, and then go in the chicken place where you get the eggs, and like living very close to nature and animals as a source of food. And I saw a document from FAO published in 2014 saying that if we produced the way that we produce, would only have 60 harvests left. I bet you guys all saw this report. Obviously, there's a lot of controversy on it, but 60 harvests left, my kids would have 55 or something. And then I was like, okay, I need to investigate the impact of my company in the future of the kids. And I was using milk, cheese, and butter. So a lot of dairy products. And back then, 2020 was all about plant-based, right? So everyone you talk was, okay, so the future is plant-based. And I was living in a farm, seeing animals with agriculture and everything working as a purpose, like the, how to call soro, is when you make the cheese, there is a water that has a lot of protein that is a leftover, and then you put to the pork, and the pork you eat, and then you change for chicken, like everything, it's all combined and working together as a whole in a citropic way. And to me, it didn't make sense, the plant-based movement. So I think that was pretty much when we talked, because I started searching for alternatives, because I didn't want it to be a plant-based cheese bread. I mean, cheese bread was born with milk, cheese, and butter. And then I saw Kiss the Ground documentary, and then I saw regenerative food systems and agriculture. And then I thought, okay, there's a way to keep using milk, cheese, and so on. So we decided that we were part of the problem, but we would fight to be part of the solution. And that's when we started investigating the impact and doing the carbon life cycle. That's the first thing that we did to understand the impact and to start our regenerative journey to minimize the impacts throughout our value chain.
That's an amazing story, and there's a lot that I love about it, and a lot I want to unpack there. And I definitely want to dive into what the transition looked like after the fact. But one of the questions I was going to ask, like, what was the plant-based movement like in Brazil versus, Anthony and I are obviously very aware of what it looks like in the US, and it sounds relatively similar. Like, plant-based was really booming. In the United States, there's generally this association with like, oh, plant-based is naturally and inherently better for the environment. Sounds like that was also the case in Brazil. And what I love about your story is like, you're hearing this while living on a farm, working with animals, seeing the positive impacts every day. And then like the regenerative thing happens, like you get that exposure and you're like, this feels right. And that's one of the things I want to touch on is, to me, just about anybody I've spoken to who understands what regenerative is, there's like an inherent wisdom and knowledge, like, yes, this makes sense. Animals do belong on the land. We should be working with animals in this like ecosystem loop of positive feedback. So I super appreciate that story. Want to give you credit for the humility to like candidly look at your business to determine its potential impact, realizing, like you said, you were, quote, part of the problem, and then transitioning to want to be better. So walk us through like what that looked like. Was it ingredient by ingredient? Was it like a full shift at one time? How did you start to shift your supply chain for more of a positive impact?
Okay, so in the carbon life cycle of the product, and this was only cheese bread in the beginning. Now we have a wider portfolio, but in the beginning it was only cheese bread. We saw that 70% of our gas emission was in the supply chain. And I feel back then, and still now, a lot of the entrepreneurs lack the ancestral knowledge of how make food, like this dialogue with the farmers, because a lot of these people, they are fundraising, they are in the big cities, Ivy Leagues, and coming from big tech companies, and then they come in the food business. And a lot of them has great plans and great companies that I admire, but I feel that we should be dialoguing more with the farmers that are farmers for 4 generation, 5 generation, and understand what they have been doing in terms of really regeneration in the soil, in the crops, because they need to function. When you think about a smallholder farmer, he needs to make the best out of his land, right? So if he can have a biodigester to provide energy, he's going to do that, not because he's worried with climate change, because that will provide him more money to, drink his beer in the weekend. So I feel sometimes we fantasize. No, really, like sometimes I feel that we fantasize these farmers. I don't know the reality in the world, but Brazil, it has the biggest land of agriculture in the world. It has the biggest biodiversity in the world. Is the third biggest meat supplier. So we feed 800 million people in the world throughout the year. So we are very agriculture, food intensive. And 77% of the lands in Brazil are with family agriculture, family farmers. So when you talk to them, they're not worried about climate change. They're not, most of them, okay? I'm not putting on the same basket, but most of them are not worried about climate change. They don't even know that exists. So when we started and we looked at 70% of our problem was in agriculture, because we were using a lot of dairy products, and we started talking to these farmers, we saw that they already did grass-fed crop cows. They already had biodigesters. They already used the raw process where they didn't use a lot of chemicals in it, because it's a methodology to do it where the time, how do you call that, curate the cheese.
Yeah.
So this was all set. And we said, okay, so there's a huge opportunity here. 80% of our farmers are within 40 kilometers of our factory today.
Wow.
So it's very local. We localize the producers, which gives us a lot of dialogue with them. But it was a huge process to pivot any way they produce the crops, like from monoculture to regenerative agriculture. This would take 4 to 5 years. A lot of cash intense. We were bootstrapping till now that we fundraise. So the thing that we did to the 70% issue was having government institutions collaborating with us, even international institutions, for the Food System Summit that we had with Rockefeller Foundation, IDO, and all of those institutions to really provide knowledge of agroforest and regenerative agriculture to the farmers. So today we are in a locally sourcing smallholder farmers using grass-fed farmers, that some of them has biodigesters, some of them are how to call that? They are moving the crops. How to call that? Rotating crops. Yeah. But we still have a lot to do now, mostly in the yucca sourcing, that I can talk a little bit further, that we are sourcing yucca in Amazon from smallholder farmers now. So this was the 70%. And then we saw that if we built our factory from scratch, we would decrease in 15% our gas emissions if we had clean energy, treating effluents, and so on. So we decided to start with that because this was on our hands. It would increase our capacity, it would increase our gross margin, contribution margin, and it was in our hands. So we built the factory from scratch with the circular economy team and our architecture team. And we built the first carbon zero factory in Brazil. When we launched, it was all over the news. Yeah, it was really
congrats.
It was impressive how media loved this news and how we got a lot of attention on it. Because if you think, and I just saw a commercial last year of a beer saying 100% green energy beer, and I said, okay, but it's cheaper to do green energy. Like people do this greenwashing with things that are cheaper. You need to understand that people are doing that not because they want to save the world, but it's cheaper, and you can save the world. So I feel during the construction of the factory, we saw how if we mimic nature and if we use the natural resources that we have, we would decrease normal expenses and also increase the positive impact. So this was what we did. And then we had the carbon footprint of the products to communicate with consumers about carbon emissions. 4 years, we have been offsetting carbon emissions for 4 years in the world. And we were one of the first companies to put the carbon emission in the package, which is something people didn't know much what was that number in the package. And we have been dialoguing with consumers the importance of it. And a lot of different things. We certified as a B company. We compensated 100% of the package. Like all this journey, we don't say that we are a regenerative company. We say that we are in a regenerative journey. And every time that we step, there is more to do in this path. So
that's amazing. I mean, B Corp, carbon neutral, or facility, smallholder, localized, supply chain. I mean, I missed a couple in there, but just amazing work. What was coming to mind for me when you were talking through that, Rafaela, was just with regenerative brands, we kind of have to do two things, right? And some brands do one or the other, and some brands kind of do a through line through the middle, which is we have to honor and uphold and reward the people that have been doing this stuff for a long time. and make sure they get that credit as like regenerative and they're supported in that way, like mainly those farmers, right? And then we have to take maybe the farmers that aren't as much on the continuum and we have to help them, right, go in the right direction. And it seems like you're kind of doing both of those. And it seems like maybe you started with that first one and that's the basis and you're kind of bridging into the second one. And I think in the last conversation, and I don't want to misquote, so you can correct whatever I say wrong here, but there was a development on the yucca side with kind of trying to re-perennialize and re-agroforestry, some of those systems. And then also, I believe at the manufacturing facility, y'all are doing some sort of technical assistance providing for some of the farmers on the dairy side. So talk to us about like those specific initiatives that y'all are leading on the raw material like sourcing.
Okay, I'm going to start with yucca, which is the most complicated one. Yucca is the only ingredient that we don't source from near the factory. We source from Paraná, which is states in the south, but it's originally from Amazon rainforest. So it makes sense to source directly. After we fundraise, we started in an accelerating program called Jornada Amazônia, Amazonian Journey. And I went to Belém, to Amazon, to source and to understand why can't we find yucca powder in the middle of Brazil in the south? And why are we buying from a big company in Paraná? And there is a lack in Brazil, even though we are so developed in agriculture and food and so on, we are massive in commodity, right? And we are the biggest commodity exported in the world. So it's a way that it only provides the commodity suppliers. So when you go to Amazon and you talk to these smallholder farmers that are doing yucca, they're producing yucca in their backyard, they're doing the powder in their own land, and they're selling to their neighbors or to the local village. They can't find association to distribute these. So we're building supply chain. And to build supply chain, you have a lot of companies in Brazil that are doing amazing job on that. You have Dengo for coconut, for cacao, for chocolate. You have Vertus. I don't know if you guys saw or heard of them. Veja from France. They're amazing, doing also latex in Amazon. And they've created a supply chain. So that's what we're doing now with some technical assistance from Eco Enterprises Fund, which is the fund that led the round, to do this, to build this supply chain and source locally from Amazon, collaborating with FAFA, which is an institution that develops supply chain. So this is something that I believe in the next 3 to 4 months, we will have some news on that. On the dairy suppliers, we are in the second biggest dairy or milk bay in Brazil. The factory is based on the second biggest milk bay in Brazil. And we have 2,500 smallholder farmers producing raw milk cheese bread. Raw milk cheese was honored as immaterial patrimonial, how do you call that? Patrimonium.
While you're looking that up, I got a question about this. The second largest dairy are all of the cows that are a part of this dairy 100% grass fed?
100% of them are grass fed, but mostly because this is how people do it. You know what I mean? It's not because it's just how they do it. Because
why would you pay for grain if you don't have to? If you can just graze your cow on the land, like why wouldn't you do that? So it totally makes sense, and it's so amazing to hear that the second largest dairy in Brazil is 100% grass fed. Like, safe to say that's not the case.
100% of the suppliers, but 100% of the suppliers that we homologated and visited, they are grass fed animals. Some of them you eat corn in the dry season, corn that they produce in their own land, but it's all free, free cage cows. And in the chicken, which is something that we have been talking a lot, the eggs, which is a huge problem. And when you talk of CPG brands, there is a limit of price you can put in the retail, otherwise people don't buy it. So if we change the chicken, for instance, the eggs for free range eggs, I don't know how to call it, but organic or free range, it would increase in 18% our price point. And then we saw that would decrease in 25% of our sales. So, there are some battles that we choose to do now, and there are some battles that we need to have suppliers near our farm, near our factory to have more competitive price to then use them. So really this path and this journey is not only a matter of us developing, but finding and sourcing government institutions or money that we could have from technical assistance, or providing credit to these farmers so then they can pivot. So it's a lot of articulation, or like a networking
architecture.
Yeah.
For sure.
I'm super impressed by the resourcefulness of you and your organization and figuring out how to tap into all these different mechanisms to help to catalyze this transition. Number one, so kudos to you for navigating that, what I assume is a relatively complex landscape, and taking advantage of those funds to try to spur this transition forward. And then part two, what I really appreciate about that story is the progress over perfection. And I think the egg example you provided is a perfect highlight. You can make the perfect product today, but your price point will become so high that you're going to actually reduce the amount of potential impact you could have as an organization. So I thought that was a really great highlight. And maybe eventually enough consumers become aware of the egg problem in Brazil, and they're willing to pay that premium, and you can start to incorporate that when the timing is right and when the market is ready. But I think that's a really great learning, because there are some amazing brands we've had on the podcast that sometimes their premiums are just too high. So I really like the strategy you have of, okay, this we're going to back burner this initiative for now to remain competitive, to continue to grow at the right pace. So just really appreciate that.
Yeah, because people want to eat sustainable products, but they don't want to pay a premium price for it. That's the reality. We're in a developing country. People don't have a lot of money to pay for carbon offset in your product. So you really need to make, and that's what we did, which I feel it was an intuitive decision back then, and it was really good one. All of our package are smaller from the main competitors. So when you go to the retail, you buy our product pretty much with the same price, or a 10 or 15% premium price, but you're receiving lower grams. That's the way that we could have clean label, all of the certifications that we have, all this compensation that we have. And then the consumers can taste it without realizing that it's more expensive than the other competitors.
Yeah,
that's a really smart play.
I was going to ask about price architecture, and I think that's really wise. And I just want to add a little bit of feedback onto what Kyle said, just to summarize some of the things you said, Rafaela, which is just hearing so much about aggregation, right, and market access that previously didn't exist. And that's the power of these enterprises, and the power of really the multi-stakeholder collaborations you're trying to set up between NGOs, between government funding, between private enterprises like yours. And then those things can collectively raise the bar and enable the practice adoption or the practice continuation. And that is really, I think, the main narrative that we're trying to tell with all this work, is that all is happening, right? But we need to look at all the systems and say, cool, how can we do more of that? What can we learn from those? So I think that's beautiful, and wanted to pull those out.
That's a great touch point. And I don't want to ask a question that I meant to ask earlier, but I totally forgot. You're in food service and you're in retail. You have some very unique value propositions versus your competition. And we talked about this a little bit with the carbon call out on the package, but how are you communicating, regenerative and or good for the planet at retail? And how are you doing that in food service and with those food service partners? And how do those strategies differ?
Okay, so it's tough, because everyone wants to talk about ESG nowadays, but they don't know where to start, right? And when you go to retail, they want to be carbon neutral. They want to communicate the SDGs. They want to say this is locally sourced, but it's something so new. Someone told them they should do that 2 years ago. I don't know how it was in US, but in Brazil it was 2 years ago people started talking about ESG in Brazil. And what we are talking to retailers is that we are not selling products. We are a source of this transformation in the food system, and we can collaborate with them, educating their team and their consumers about why this is better for them. So not only communicating the certifications that we have, explaining what a B company is, explaining, why we should neutralize the carbon and do the carbon offsetting, but also helping them make better choices for their retails, actually, and really better exposure of these brands that maybe don't have the same volumes as legacy brands, but in 2 or 3 years or 5 years, that I believe in Brazil, if they don't put this spotlight in these companies, they would be, like just this big supermarkets that you just don't go because you can't find a product. So we dialogue a lot with retailers in this more knowledge spectrum. In the food service, we come with differentiations in terms of how they can reutilize the products, not 30% of everything that we produce goes to waste. And in the food service, this is a lot of money. So if they bake the cheese bread and they throw it away in the afternoon, they're losing money. So we are educating them how they can upcycle these products and maybe sell to a higher price if they put like ham and cheese and, make this delicious sandwich. So we're talking of all these principles, not only in terms of, the normal ways of doing it, but really providing services and ideas for them to increase their volumes and their sales and their margins, which I believe this is the way that we could do today to talk of ESG, because again, I don't feel that people are prepared to make hard choices, if this is going to impact on their margin. So we just created a impact tribe in NUU. And one of the goals for Q1 is to have the first product of the Impact Tribe. And we are hiring a person near the factory to plant the trees. I don't know how you call it in the US, but here in Brazil is viverista. Viverista is someone that works in, there is a place where you go where you have all the seedlings, and then you go
it's to, and then you
put, yeah. So we are hiring someone to do that. And then when we talk to retailers, we say, okay, so you have a 5% contract, right? Yeah, okay. How about we have 3% contract, and this 2% we plant trees in Brazilian savannas, and then you can communicate that with your consumers, and then we can have, them with a shirt, with your logo, and then you're planting trees. So really adding value on their communication to sell more, and impacting also, the deforestation that we have in the Brazilian savannas. So all of these ideas that we are bringing to retail are really having a good acceptance, because it's in the right moment. They're looking for solutions, and not the legacy brands can provide that to them, because they are also with a 2030, 2040 goals without a lot of solutions now. So
the amount of multi-stakeholder engagement and creativity is just so wild. Rafaela, I can't even imagine how many calls you've been on and just trying to herd cats is the term here in the US, of just a lot of different people with a lot of different goals, but finding through line solutions that work for everyone, and really being, the person that probably takes a lot of that risk as the activator of those solutions, as evidenced by y'all being the ones that just lead kind of the tree plantings itself. Right.
Yeah.
So just commend you for that. And I'm kind of curious to hear you talk about how the product line has developed, specifically on the retail side. Like, I'm looking at the website now, and you have yuca fries is what I'm seeing. I don't speak Portuguese, and I can't read the labels, but like, it looks like yuca fries. You have some pizza. You obviously have the cheese bread SKU. So how did you evolve into this 12 SKU lineup, and what was really the process there?
Okay, so obviously I look a lot of what has been released in the American market and the European market. I feel you guys are amazing in creating products and brands, and just, developing new solutions for consumers. And so the pizza line was developed after looking a lot of cauliflower, obviously, and the growth of gluten-free pizzas in US. At some point, Cauliflower was the fastest growing company in US, and we saw a huge opportunity to have a gluten-free pizza in Brazil. And then we created the pizza line, and with a twist, because all of our products are air fryer friendly. We saw a huge increase of use of air fryer in Brazil. I'm a mom. I don't have time. I have an air fryer that saves my life. So the size of the pizza fits in the air fryer, and all of our products fits in the air fryer, which was something really interesting.
That's super smart. Yeah.
Is that like a huge, like there's a ton of people in Brazil who are like just switching to air fryer instead of ovens? That's a big thing? Okay.
It's a big thing. It's a big thing. The air fryer companies came with huge advertising, and really saves a lot of time. So we started with, after cheese bread, we started with tapioca sticks, which you're saying look like a tapioca fries. It has only 3 ingredients, which is yuca, cheese, and milk. It was created for kids to hold, because we know that kids, when they're starting to eat food, they hold a lot for a long time, and also to dip in sauces without having your hands dirty. So this was the product. Today, it represents nearly 20% of our sales, the tapioca sticks, which was a huge success. And we only have 1 SKU, so we're probably launching 3 more in this year. And then we did the pizza line because of this success of the gluten-free pizzas in US. And then the dices, the tapioca dices, were actually a fun story, because a huge chef in Brazil, one very renowned chef in Brazil, created these dices, and it's a phenomenon. He created this 15 years ago. You can find them everywhere too. And no one knows that he was the one that created it. So we went to São Paulo to visit him in his restaurant, and I said, hey, you know that you created a category in retail, and people are eating in retail and food service and all over. And he's like master chef. He's very like this top chef celebrity. And I was very like anxious when I was meeting him for the first time. And then obviously the talk was very good. And I talked to him how Kiss the Ground changed my mind. And then he showed me the Kiss the Ground book and gave it to me. And then the story was so good. And I said, do you want to create your recipe and launch in retail? And he said, yeah, why not? So we launched this product last October, and with 2 versions. The original version that comes with a sauce inside, which also we always saw that people would buy these products and then buy a huge sauce to go with it. And then we said, it doesn't make sense. You maybe buy a huge sauce and you throw it away. And then when you open the box, I don't know if I have the box here, but you have the little sauce inside. And then we launched a vegan version, which is our first vegan product after 25 releases, that is with fermented cereals, which was something that was growing a lot in the US, precise fermentation. And then we wanted to understand how that tasted, and that's how we created the portfolio. And this year, we are going to have some releases in tapioca as sort of like a wrap, when you have like burritos or wrap. It's a huge product. A lot of people eat that at home in Brazil, and it's hard to make. You need to pour, and then, so that's going to be the release. I just told you guys. I don't know if I could, but.
It's all frozen, right, Rafaela? It's all frozen. And
all frozen.
I think you told me in a previous call that not only was there such little better for you when you started this brand, but like frozen was absolutely dominated by all the big players. Correct?
It's still. It's still. Yesterday, I was visiting retailers in São Paulo with our sales team. And when you go to Pão de Açúcar, which is the #1 supermarket in Brazil, and Carrefour, I bet you guys know also, you see like this frozen this fridges and massive legacy brands, and we're like, they're trying to make our point, to prove our point. But we're there. Right. We don't have huge presence, but we are in the biggest ones, which is cool.
Yeah.
That's huge. What I want to pivot back to some of the you were saying earlier about how you're partnering with retailers. And one thing that I was struck by was it feels like you're not necessarily talking about what with your partners, but you're talking about why. And in just hearing throughout the course of this conversation, you were so focused on solving problems and using this brand to solve different problems, both from an ESG perspective, from a consumer usability perspective. And I think it's really cool. I don't think we've ever talked to somebody who is so focused on problem solving, with the exception of maybe Zach from Zach's Money, because he just wants the best guacamole chip, and that he's fixated on solving that one problem. But your ability to take that mindset and apply it in a variety of different ways is just fascinating. So super appreciate that. You talked a little bit about the future and some new product lines that are coming out. Is there anything else you can tell us about, like what's on the horizon for NUU? Is it, new categories that you want to get into? Is it continuing market expansion? What else is on the horizon for you all?
Is it U.S. products?
I know. Some universities are doing a study of go-to-market in the US, and we have been collaborating with them. Students from graduation and MBAs, and it's amazing to see the opportunity that we have in US, but we have so much opportunity in Brazil and we need to focus. But I just want to go back a little bit, Kyle, on your thought of how we are solving problems. And I want to acknowledge the team that I have. And I believe that being a female-led company, it's really what brings this spectrum and this idea of thinking of how we can do in a better way. We're not only doing cheese bread, we're doing cheese bread that are better for the people, and actually growing a company as well. 70% of our leadership is female, 100% of the C-suite is female. We have 47% of moms working at NUU. So this is really moms trying to understand how they can create, better world for their kids, but also have a better quality time, So we're not working. When you think of a company that just fundraised, and I talked to some people saying, "Oh, I work 14 hours a day." I was like, "This is not sustainable. It's not something that you should be proud of, you should be proud of working 8 hours a day and spending time with your kids and connecting with, spirituality and being around nature and doing your hobbies or so on." So I just want to acknowledge that we have amazing team of women and also of men that has a female side very developed to have all of this solution. Okay, so we just fundraised. It was the first round that we did during the craziness of fundraising. And we started when the whole world was like, okay, we're not investing any longer, in a year and a half ago or something. And then we started pitching. And when we started pitching in Brazil, we saw that people were very focused on plant-based. We couldn't find any fit with the thesis of VCs. And then we went to US and Europe to find this, nature positive funds that are looking for this type of companies. And then we just completed the round. And our goals for this year is to grow 3 times in sales. So we need to move from 1,500 points of sales to 3,500 points of sales, launch new products, yucca-based. And we have an amazing growth director that comes from big techs, and we are implementing a data-driven methodology to grow the business, really looking at data. And we have a data scientist now, which is something so unique for NUU, because everything we did was, more connected to intuition and maybe, how we thought things should be done. And now we have data to provide us the answers we need, or, at least the path we need to grow and use wisely the money, because we don't want to be those crazy companies that fundraise every year and just, this is not how we grow. So yeah, I guess that's the challenge for this year.
Yeah. And a big congrats to you. I mean, you raised $4 million, at least in US dollars, which I believe is even more in Brazilian currency.
20 million in Brazil.
Yeah. So
it was the biggest fundraise. Yeah.
Yeah. And I loved your comments on the feminine piece. We have to re-feminize the food system, and we really need to bring any femininity into the financial system. And so I'm kind of happy we're bridging that segue into the financial piece, because I think with what we see with food and agriculture is we lost all the feminine spirit, or we lost so much of it, and we have to bring that back. And if you look at indigenous peoples and ancient cultures, like the women were always the custodians of the food and agriculture systems, really. And we just don't have any of that in the financial system, it seems like, at least in the mainstream. And there's so many questions. I'm trying to avoid asking you like an 18-part question, but there's so many things I'd love for you to unpack, Rafaela, about the financial journey, which is like the bootstrapping piece, how you finally did the fundraising and how successful that has been. And you kind of just touched on those, but also touch on what we have seen and everyone we've talked to is that it's really, really hard to build a supply chain that's regenerative or on this regenerative journey that you can totally capitalize through the price of the end product to the consumer, because there's just not enough price elasticity on shelf. And so having these stakeholders, whether it be, a retailer or a foundation or the NGOs, like come in and help out with parts of that, or developing a unique corporate structure that allows for legal entities that can do different financial things. So I ended up asking a super long-winded question, but what has that journey been like for you? And, what have the lessons been, and what do you see for that in the future of like capitalizing this enterprise and capitalizing these changes that we need to make?
Oof, okay.
Yeah, take a breath. Take a second.
That was all 2 shots of espresso I had this morning were loaded into that question.
That's a good one. Yeah, I believe that you need to be extremely committed with change, no matter what it takes. Obviously, all this networking that we have been doing, even with you, like you were one of the people that I've talked to throughout this process. You, NGOs, government institutions, big legacy brands that are supporting us in some projects as well. Like the number one meat producer in the world is supporting us in one of the projects that we have of yucca sourcing in Amazon. So all of this effort to collaborate with other institutions, to me, maybe you can find the solution quickly as you could find in your own company, but really gives you more power to influence and to make change. And we didn't talk about that, but for a long time we bought raw milk cheese under the, how to call that, like not attested by the government, because they didn't have the certification, because it's so hard to have it. So we had to fight for laws for them to be certified without having these standards that they couldn't cope with, because they're smallholder farmers. They don't have, some of the laws were in a language that they couldn't even access. Most of these people don't even know. They don't have a graduation or something. So we had to articulate a lot throughout this process. And I believe this is something that grew on us and as in the team as well, to have an open source and, to collaborate and to really make change. If we want to, and that's one of the things, that's why we fundraised. If we want to bring positive impact to Brazil, we need to scale, because otherwise we are buying for, 10 smallholder farmers. This is not a lot of impact when you think that you have 2,500 smallholder farmers. So in terms of articulating and networking, I believe this is the way for us to bring massive solutions. In terms of the ingredients and how we can use them in the products, even though not having a premium price, I believe having smaller packages, having high quality ingredients, so that you don't need to use a lot of this ingredient, just a portion of it. If you have a 21-day raw milk cheese, it tastes so good, sort of like a Parmesan, but you don't need to use a lot because it gives you an amazing taste. If you have egg, normal egg, not powder, it gives you just smoothness, and you don't need to put another ingredient. So really just having good, high quality ingredients. And what is your third question? In one question you had what was it?
I think
Anthony, if you can't ask it again, there's no reason she should have to answer it. I'm just going to throw that out there.
I believe we could go again. Spare my English.
I mean, I've been so impressed in all the communications with you, Rafaela, and just in this podcast interview, like this is not your native language, and for you to be able to discuss these topics in this depth with this clarity, like it's just so impressive and shows the massive amount of work that you've done. So just kudos to you for that, especially.
Thank you. A lot of work and a lot of work to be done as well. I believe that we have a huge challenge, and I say that to my team a lot. We have been talking a lot about impact and SDGs and ESG and all of these things that we fight for, and we need to prove a point now. We need to sell a lot. We need to grow 3 times, because in the end, people fundraised us, and we're an enterprise. We're not an NGO. So we need to have good gross margins, good contribution margins, positive EBITDA. And I believe this is the challenge, because if you just go in the normal sales path, you're good to go. I mean, you have a lot, and then you're just scaling up. And it's so tough to scale up and scale deep in the same time. And in scaling deep in Brazil, you're needing to fix a lot of things: manufacturing, logistics, supply chain, gender equality,
legislation,
legislation, tons of things. And we're choosing one battle a day and just flowing. I don't know.
I'm curious. I want to kind of like double click on this growth piece you've talked about a couple of times, going from 1,000 to 3,000, kind of 3xing there. What's like the total size of the prize in Brazil in terms of doors? Is it 5,000 potential points of distribution? Is it 10,000? And how is that broken up? Like in the US, there's the natural channel, there's the MULO, like conventional channel, there's mass, there's club. How does that? And that's typical. Like that's like the arc. You start at natural, you go to conventional, you go to mass, you go to club. What does that journey look like in the standard playbook for a Brazilian brand? And is that the same that you're kind of going after?
Yeah, but in Brazil, you don't have like a Whole Foods or a Trader Joe's. Right. You don't have that type of chain. You have premium chains that sell legacy brands and natural brands, but there is no path as in US where you start in small natural. There is some stores, but big, small ones. So in terms of size, in food service, we have 35,000 A/B points of sales where in the south and southeast of Brazil, where we can sell. In the center, south and southeast of Brazil, 35,000. And in retail, we have nearly 8,000 points of sales of, I'm saying supermarkets and retailers that fit our category, not all of the big ones. So you have the regional ones, which are, retails in Rio, São Paulo, Minas Gerais, and a lot. And you have the national ones. The national ones, we're already on them in some states, and now we are growing to be in every state in Brazil. And we are in the food service just launching a line in the next 2 months. So we don't have a line of food service launched, which is something that we're very excited for, because we believe that no one's doing what we want to do in food service in Brazil. So really the growth of points of sales are going to be in food service, but retail plays a huge role in terms of revenue for us as well, because when you enter a supermarket that has 100 point of sales, like that, it's just a massive volume. So, and something that's growing a lot here, I don't know how it's in the US, is the digital market, the digital retail, and the e-commerce. Quick, like the ones that you ordered and in 15 minutes they're in your house. And we are in some of them, and also in the condominiums. Yeah. Retails, like this is small ones that you go and you grab and you pay. And this is growing a lot in Brazil, and we're also in this category. So.
Yeah, online grocery and convenience, kind of those specialized convenience.
Exactly.
That Kyle's question sparked one in mind, which is another kind of comparison question. We talk so much about velocity over here, Rafael, and how do you get the product off the shelf once it's on the shelf with demos, sampling, digital ads, promotions. Is it a similar playbook in Brazil? Like what have y'all done for trial and, customer discovery to actually start getting people to see these products, try these products, and repurchase them?
Yeah, we didn't have money, so we never had money for marketing.
That's how you got good products.
Yeah, we do have good products, but we didn't have money for marketing. We never had a marketing campaign or, the design that you guys saw is my husband. He was the one that designed the brands, the packaging. So it was very in-house, the whole creative process. And now we have, so now it's a different time. But what we're doing is sampling through events. Since we were born in events, and I did events for 2 years, and I'm talking big concerts. We're going to do Lollapalooza. Lollapalooza is a concert festival.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
so we're doing Lollapalooza, and then all of this
in America or in Brazil?
No, in Brazil.
Okay.
Otherwise, I'm buying tickets. Let's go.
Right.
No, in Brazil. But so what we're trying to understand is how we can keep growing the presence on events that has our public and the people that our consumers are navigating in. How we can sell the products at the same time we're doing sampling. So we already have a franchise in Rio, someone that does these events, and we sell her at the minimum price that we can have. We don't have any gain when she participates in the event. And when she sells, she receives the money and she has the profitability of it. But in the same time, our brand is being exposed. So what we are creating in this first quarter is a way to scale this model in other cities. So then we can grow. And that's the methodology that we're doing of data-driven, is we're creating biomes, right? So when you think of a tree in the middle of a landscape that has no other trees, it's the same parallel of a point of sale in a city that no one knows the company. So we start in a point of sale in a city. No one knows the company. We're in the frozen sector. It's not very biodiverse. People don't have experienced the company in different places. And that's how we created a platform where we see in the map of Brazil, the bubbles. I can show it to you later, but you see all the dots are points of sales that we are in. And then we created these consumer bubbles, and that's how we are going to grow, crossed with the, how to call it, PB, how much money these people have, how to call that?
Like the demographics, like the buying power, the buying power of the individuals.
Purchasing power.
Yes.
Yeah.
GDP, the GDP of the region cross with the points of sales that we are and the maturity of the point of sales that we are. And then we know exactly when we should do an event, when we should open a cafeteria, when we should start on a retail. Because otherwise, if I go to a retail and there's no public, there's no consumer for me, I'm paying up a lot of money to do the sellout and increase velocity. But we want to stop selling, so then people will start buying. It's a shift of how we grow here, based on this data analysis that we're start doing here in the company after fundraising.
I really like the ambassador franchisee model you outlined before. Sort of this break even, you're not going to make any money on it. It's a pure exposure play. And it sounds like the system you developed for that individual is like they are incentivized to perform the best because they make more money when they do that.
Exactly.
So that's a really, really cool model. The closest thing I can think of, like, in the US is like a really good demo person, like in store. I don't think that same model exists in like an event perspective that I'm aware of, but I think it's really cool and something that any US brand listening to can like try to figure out, like, how do you adopt that in the US? Because to me, that's a no-brainer. If you can break even and just get a ton of exposure and trial, like that's a huge win, especially in a new market as you're looking to expand into new geographies.
Exactly. And like when you think of a win-win situation where we win brand exposure and the person that is the franchisee, the franchise woman, she wins the profitability. It's so amazing because we bake products in the event. It's tough. It's time consuming. It's a lot of energy you need to bake, and you need to put the stuffs on it. And if something breaks and it's someone that I'm hiring, they're going to say, oh, okay, the stove is broke. That's bad. But if you have someone that needs to sell a lot to, in the end of the day, have a good profitability, she's going to do her best. She's going to be enthusiastic to talk about the brand. She's going to be in her best performance. And for us, that's what really matters. In the end of the day, we want to have a good consumer experience in our booth. So, and we don't have time or team to do these little events, they are creating brand exposure and brand awareness. So I'm very fond of this model, and we have one franchise in Rio, and now we're scaling to the other cities.
It's really cool. And it's actually super aligned with what Dr. James Richardson recommends in his book, Ramping Your Brand, which I really believe is like a great resource for emerging brands in the US. I think events, people forget about it a lot because we get so fixated on retail and like trying to drive velocity right at the point of sale. But there's this really interesting thing that happens when you go to an event where people are already having this really positive experience and they taste a really good product while they're having this positive experience versus like trying to shove a sample down their throat when it's 6 p.m. and they're trying to rush home to like get, food made for their kids. So I love that. It's really cool and really unique. Rafael, I'm going to take us home with the final question, which is, how do we get regen brands to have 50% market share by 2050? I know it's an easy one.
I don't believe we could have 50% of regen companies without having the legacy brands with us. I believe, and I always say that when people get to like, oh, I don't talk to Coca-Cola, I don't talk to JBF, I don't talk to Nestle. I'm like, if these guys don't come, nothing's going to change. If you think of the land that Nestle has is the size of France, if you want to have regenerative agriculture and regenerative process inherent in the whole process, you have to have the legacy brands coming and acquiring, having M&As, having CVCs, investing. And I believe that's the path. I believe at some point we're going to see this shift. And I hope to see it in the velocity that we need to not end the world. But to end in one major shift, I would say we need to have the legacy brands coming to support this cause.
Yeah, I love and I hate your answer because I'm one of those people who's like, no, I don't want to talk to these guys. Like, let's focus on the little guys. Like, let's have them do the job. But you're right. Like, in order, like, if you look at it to your point, like sheer impact, the amount of land managed by their supply chain, that's really where you're going to make an impact, And I think if you look at organic, for example, there's private label organic in all of the major markets in the United States now. That would not have happened if the organic movement did not succeed to begin with. So I think to your point, the small brands right now, the startups who are doing it right with the right missions need to prove success, need to show that these models are viable, need to prove market validation. And once that happens, I think it will garner more attention from some of these huge multinational organizations, and they will start to hopefully make some of those supply chain transitions as well. So as much as I don't like your answer, I think it's the right answer.
I know you don't like it, but I mean, I just don't see another way, especially in Brazil, that they are so present, like they're they have so much power in the government, particularly. I feel that, if we want to see changes, and when you think about regeneration, and today we are paying premium prices for the farmers, but if you could pay for natural, the natural resources they are providing with increase of biodiversity, sequestrating carbon or, different landscapes and so on, I believe farmers also will do the shift. So I believe that there's this parallel of legacy brands coming in this movement and farmers seeing a way to increase their profitability through these changes. So shifting from monoculture to agroforestry, for them, it's very risky. So they should know that they're going to have a premium price, that they will be paid for different source of revenues, not only the food that they're selling. And these two forces are, I believe, that come together, and that will be initiated by the legacy brands. But hopefully we see another way. I don't know.
Yeah, and I feel like you're such a great example of like worked at Johnson & Johnson, but was raised by smallholder farmers, and like this beautiful confluence of those human experiences. And so much, we've in the previous episode with Ed at Wild Farm, he talked about a lot about human relationships, and that's how we create these changes. And we sometimes forget that at all those big companies, there's human beings working there. And we can say whatever we want about how we feel about that. But at the end of the day, we're not going to change any of this until we change like human beings, right? And
Exactly.
so if everyone's not at the table, it's really hard to do that. And if we're always like pointing fingers and it's always super divisive, it's going to be really hard to do that.
Exactly. I heard a term yesterday that I loved, is when you move from egocentric to ecocentric. And to move from that, it's a lot of I don't know, you need to see a lot of documentaries and read a lot of books and hear a lot of podcasts, and it takes a year or two to understand the size of the problem and to really have the guts to make solutions wherever they are, even in small companies or big ones.
Rafaela, this is a question I mean to ask on a lot of podcasts that I often forget to, but you mentioned Kiss the Ground earlier. What were like maybe your top 3 other either favorite podcast episodes, favorite books, or documentaries that have really like helped you to change that ego to eco mindset?
Kiss the Ground, obviously. I love Regeneration and in the Climate Crisis in One Generation. I feel it's an amazing book that you see in different sectors how you can deliver change. There is a book called Many Hot from Alex Atala, 600 pages, that he studies yucca. Oh my God, there's so many.
Are you looking at your bookshelf right now?
Yeah, I have.
Okay.
I have 20 things written down for the show notes that I have no idea how to spell, that I'm gonna have to send to Rafaela and get her to spell for me.
Okay. Oh, there is Third Plate from Dan Barber, Whole Larder Love, which I love also. There is a book from Brazilian that called Owners of the Market that talks about the big retailers and how they shift. This is the thing about how they shift everything. And also a lot of ancestral knowledge. I read a lot of Krenak and how plants dialogue, how do you call that? Secret Life of Plants.
Secret Life of Trees.
Yeah, Secret Life of Trees. We study a lot of these books when we think not only to understand the impact, but to structure how the company grows. We mimic a lot of these processes.
Super appreciate that. That's something I'm going to try to make a note to do in more episodes. So I think it's so interesting to hear like how all these founders doing this amazing work, like what is influencing them. Something I want to know personally, and I think our audience would also really appreciate.
Yeah. And Kyle just likes to create more work for me to make for show notes. So,
that's my goal. How do I make this harder for AC?
Guys, thank you so much. I love what you guys are doing. I love to be part of this episode. I love to see that you guys are going international, and hope you can have more Brazilian companies. We have amazing companies here in Brazil, and I believe we're having COP 25 in Belém, which I believe we're going to have a spotlight in Brazil, and to see these amazing founders that are creating amazing products from this huge biodiversity that we have, and collaborating with your American way of growing business, and really, like this strategic focus of growing. I just love this combination. I feel that we have a lot to share and collaborate.
Agreed.
Totally. Well, thank you for sharing the inspiring work that NUU is doing. One of the most eye-opening stats you shared, and I know that Brazil is massive, but 800 million people versus the US is 330-ish. Just highlights the potential impact
around the world. We have 200 million citizens, but we
That's
feed
how many they feed.
800 million people around the world.
Amazing.
Wow.
Well, yeah, thank you for sharing the story and teaching us about the Brazilian marketplace. Something that I personally don't know anything about. So appreciate the time.
Thanks, Rafaela.
Thank you so much. See you guys soon.
For show notes, episode transcripts, and more information on our guests and what we discuss on the show, check out our website, regen-brands.com. That is regen-brands.com. You can also find our Regen recaps on the website. Regen recaps take less than 5 minutes to read and cover all the key points of the full hour-long conversations. You can check out our YouTube channel, Regen Brands Podcast, for all of our episodes with both video and audio. The best way to support our work is to give us a 5-star rating on your favorite podcast platform, subscribe to future episodes, and share the show with your friends. Thanks for tuning in to the Regen Brands podcast, brought to you by the Regen Coalition and Outlaw Ventures. We hope you learned something new in this episode, and it empowers you to use your voice, your time, and your dollars to help us build a better and more regenerative food system. Love you guys.